Okay, we're done with the worms. Thank goodness. And into fungi or fungi, however you want to pronounce it. All right. Okay, so what is a fungus? It is a chemoheterotroph. Okay, they have cell walls. These cell walls are composed of chitin, which is a type of protein. They lack chlorophyll. They don't perform photosynthesis. They are related, believe it or not, to animals, more animals than anything. Um, Fungi do a lot of stuff for us. Mainly, they are the decomposers and recyclers. You go out into your forest and you're going to see them. They form interesting vascular plants, flowering plants, and that sort of stuff. They form associations with the roots of these vascular plants and help the plant absorb water and minerals. Basically, this association is if it's outside the root, on the outside of the root, it's called an actomycorrhiza. If it's inside the root, it's called an endomycorrhiza. Know those words, but if you have a vascular plant without the mycorrhiza, without these fungi, they don't grow as well because what happens is the fungi can extend out, hundreds of feet away from the plant, much further than the roots can, and absorb the water and nutrients from the soil and bring it back to the tree. And there are plants that cannot grow without their mycorrhiza. There have been plenty of times. I can think of one example of when some adventurers went down to Africa and saw these beautiful orchids that they loved, and they wanted to bring them back and grow them, and they would never grow. And it's because they had to have their mycorrhiza. Okay. They are used for food. They're used in religious ceremonies, in the manufacture of food and beverages. They produce bunches of antibiotics. They are an important research tool, and they can cause plenty of diseases in plants and animals and humans. And they typically can spoil your fruits, your pickles, your jams, your jellies, those kinds of things. So they are important. When we look at a fungus, depending on how they reproduce, a lot of them reproduce by budding. Now, this is a yeast, and you can see that lovely little bud right there. And this is important to know whether it's budding or not. So, like if we get a specimen, a urine specimen or vaginal specimen, for example, and we expect that they have a yeast infection. One of the things we want to look at is look at that yeast and see if they're budding. If they're just yeast present, which yeast is present in a lot of places, it's not budding, that tells us it's not a real reactive, active infection. But if you're sitting there and looking at this specimen and there's buds everywhere, then you know that this is an actively reproducing infection and it needs to get treated right now. Okay, so that kind of information is important. So if you ever see a report that says budding yeast, that's an important clue, and it's something that the doctor needs to be aware of so that they can get it treated. Fungus also have what stalks, if you will, that are called hyphae. Okay, we have two different kinds of hyphae, aseptate and septate. And a lot of these organisms, we can differentiate them into their different classes based on looking at these hyphae. Septate means they are separated, and there's a septum between these parts of the hyphae. If it doesn't have these sections, it's called aseptate. And that will put it in a particular class of organism. It'll help us figure out what this organism is because we can look and see in the stain whether it's septate or aseptate. This is an example of how they can spread out and form these mycelia. This is a way you can almost looks like a spider net, but they form these little hairs, and this allows them to bring nutrients in. So fungi absorb by absorption. Okay, most of them are going to decompose. Some of them can actually trap and kill small worms. They're pretty good at that. Their structures allow them to derive the nutrients from living plants and animals. Most of them are aerobic, some are anaerobic. And many of the yeasts are facultative anaerobes. They prefer anaerobic conditions, but they can work under aerobic conditions. Okay. So when we look at fungi, all have some means of asexual reproduction involving mitosis and cytokinesis, going through mitosis. Most of them also reproduce sexually. And I will tell you, we used to classify them, can't say that anymore, by their sexual spores. And when we started classifying, the problem is that some of these guys, we didn't find sexual spores. And so we put them in this odd little category of, we don't know what these things are. Well, nowadays, we'll talk about, we look at their nucleic acids and classify them according to that. And we've actually reclassified some of these guys because of that. Okay? There's an asexual spore, a sporangium, okay, that forms, and it's very clear to look at. All right, so we may look for those. This is an asexual spore with that sporangium. This is penicillium that we get penicillin from. To me, it looks like a hand with fingers. Okay? That to me is an easy way to pick this guy out. We have subgroups of fungi, we have division, Mycota. Used to call it zygomycota, so if I say zygomycota, it's because that's the way I've known it forever. This has been a recent reclassification. Division Ascomycota, Basidiomycota, and that group that we used to keep, we don't knows, they were in what we call Deuteromycetes. And we have worked through a lot of these and reclassify, and basically now the Deuteromycetes is just gone and put into these other areas. So the first one is the Zygomycota, or the lovely little, this is easier to pronounce than Mycorrhizomycota. Sorry. But we still sometimes, if you look at sometimes in the literature and everything like that, they still call them Zygomycota. So just FYI, you may hear either one or both or whatever. But these are cup fungi. They form a little cup. The mature organism forms a cup, and you can see it asexually reproduces by sporangium. So you want to look for the sporangium. And you look for the cups in the mature specimen. So you're not going to see this, basically the sporangia, in these other divisions. They're going to use something else. So if you see a sporangia, it's going to be in Zygomycota or the Mycorrhizomycota. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I put this in because this is one of those that frequently inhabits bread, that black bread mold, Rhizopus, found in mature fruits, vegetables, jellies, syrups, bread, peanuts, tobacco. It's everywhere. But you can see that little rhizoid, and you see these little sporangiophores, and there's that sporangium right there. And you can see this underneath the microscope with that. Okay. It approximately, a little over 1,000 of these guys are known. They are mostly terrestrial. They live in the soil, decaying plants. Some are parasites. and some of them will form these symbiotic relationships with the plants. Now, if you get a problem, if you get a disease with a zygomycosis, it is usually in the mucus or skin part. Can be in the genital tract, can be in the gastrointestinal tract. A lot of times when you get these, it's due to diabetes or immunosuppression. Interesting that contaminated adhesive tapes and wooden tongue depressors have been reported to be the leading cause of outbreaks of zygomycosis in nosocomial places. Yeah, so be careful with your lovely little tongue depressors and adhesive tapes because they can get moldy. These guys can cause an invasion of the vascular tissue and can cause necrosis. And they can be quite frustrating. But rhizopus is the primary one, and again, there. Ascomycota is probably the more important one. This is sac fungi. Again, they can asexually reproduce and sexually reproduce. Most of the guys that we couldn't figure out what they were in Ascomycota. When they got re-identified, they got put in Ascomycota. So a lot of these guys, we can't really see the sexual form of it. There are plenty of species. Some of them are asexual. They don't have a sexual cycle. They do not form the asci. Familiar examples of the Ascomycota are the morels, truffles, yeasts, and a lot of the important antibiotics and compounds and stuff like that come from this particular phylum or division. Okay. Couple I do want to mention that can be pathogenic. Candida albicans. This is your yeast. Albicans meaning white. This can cause thrush in the mouth. It can cause those vaginal yeast infections. And you're going to look for these yeast again. Go back and look at this right here. This is what we're looking for. Those budding yeast cells. Okay, just FYI. That's what we're truly looking for. Okay. We're going to look at these as we go down. Pneumocystis jirovecii. This is a lung infection that is barely diagnostic for HIV. Aspergillus, this one can cause a lung infection. It can cause ear infections. It's an interesting little guy. So tens of these species cause skin infections. If you get a plant pathogen, yeah, the mildews and rice blasts, and it can really cause problems in plants. But when we look at this is penicillium growing on an agar plate. And you can see that little hand, if you will, with the fingers. Here is Aspergillus. This is what it looks like underneath the microscope. Okay. And this is Candida again. This is yeast, and this is thrush. What it looks like just overgrows the tongue. In the lungs, it'll get into the lungs and cyst in the lungs, and you can see it right there. And you can see all those lovely little spots in that chest X-ray. So not too fun there. Yeast actually belongs to what we call Saccharomycetes, but some of them. This basically, that's the genus Saccharomycetes, whereas and then some of them are Candida. But Candida is the one that causes the diseases. Basidium mycota doesn't really cause us any problems, but I put it in here because these are your mushrooms. These are your true mushrooms. Just FYI. Um, is there are two large divisions, but the higher fungi, mushrooms, the puffballs, the fungi, the chanterelles, all that. There is one bad guy in here, and that is Cryptococcus. And I can't get out of there without mentioning it. This is an invasive fungus that causes a disease in immunosuppressed patients. Again, very, very rare in healthy individuals, but can get into the brain, particularly Cryptococcus neoformans, and cause meningitis. So, when we look for these certain organisms, this is what we're looking for. And I will tell you, the fungi, we'll get into this, are much harder to treat than your bacterial infections and your viral infections. We have the least amount of chemicals to treat these guys with. And fungus infections can get really nasty. And we can look at some of these.